What if I told you there's a commander that can win games without dealing any damage or without using any combos? Instead, he wins games by drawing cards. And the best part, this deck is built on a €100 budget. Vnwxt, Verbose Host. Alright, let's address the obvious first. This commander's name looks like someone smashed their face straight into a keyboard. So during this video, I will be referring to him as Vinnie. For just 2 mana, you get a 0/4 homunculus creature with a speed mechanic from the Aether Drift set. And here's how it works. The moment you play any permanent that has a start your engines mechanic, your speed becomes 1. From there, you get an ability for the rest of the game. And this ability is not connected to your commander or any permanent, it is connected to you as a player. And this ability says whenever 1 or more opponents lose life during your turn, if your speed is less than 4, you get to increase your speed by 1. And this ability can only trigger once per turn. So if you started your engines and you hit an opponent during your turn, your speed ticks up by 1. Hit him again on the next turn and it ticks up again. And once you hit 4 speed, which is the maximum, this entire deck transforms. Because from that point forward, whenever we have Vinnie on the field, whenever we would draw 1 card, we get to draw 2 cards instead. Not just on your draw step, not once per turn, but every single card you draw. And this ability honestly redefines how a mono blue deck can win a game of Commander. Because this deck isn't your average mono blue value pile. It's not a tempo deck, it's not just a stack of counter spells, and it's not a mid-range shell that wins by using some infinite combos. This deck is way more unique and way more dangerous. This is a deck that wins by drawing cards. And that's not a metaphor. We don't care about combat damage, we don't care about infinite combos. Instead, we play a package of 5 really unique win conditions. I'll be going really in-depth in these cards in the win condition section later on the video, but let me just give you a small preview of what we're working with. 2 iconic mono blue cards that simply say whenever your library is empty and you have to draw a card, you win the game instead. A really simple artifact that mills all our opponents for 2 cards whenever we draw a card. A cute little frog that wins us the game instantly whenever it attacks and we have 20 or more cards in our hand. And a creature that makes the entire table lose life whenever we draw a card. And with Vinnie doubling up on every single card draw effect we play in the deck, it will be really easy to close out games with these win conditions. And honestly, these 5 win conditions are what make this deck so special. Not only are we doing something that barely any other decks do, winning without actually dealing damage, but we're also making it happen on a strict €100 budget. This deck is way more explosive than it might seem at first sight, because with this deck you can easily set up for a win as early as turn 6 or 7. As per usual, I will be going over every single card in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up in 8 categories: the speed enablers, card draw, support and utility, ramp and acceleration, the win conditions, interaction and counter magic, the lands, and in the end, an upgrade section. Let's get started by talking about the speed enablers. These are a really efficient and evasive 1-drop creatures. In this deck, these cards only serve one purpose, and that is dealing 1 damage on turn 2, turn 3, and turn 4 to get Vinnie online as soon as possible. We run a total of 12 of these 1-drop creatures, which gives us a 60.9% chance to get one in our opening hand. And if we're on the draw, that chance actually increases to 65.9. If you do factor in 1 mulligan, our chances of getting a 1-drop creature in our opening hand are actually over 80%. And this is exactly where we want to be. Because if you don't have a 1-drop creature in your opening hand, you want to be taking aggressive mulligans until you actually get one. Because this deck is absolutely useless without being at max speed. Artificer's Assistant, a 1 mana 1/1 flying burp with a pretty cool passive effect. Whenever we cast a historic spell, we get to scry 1. Historic spells being legendaries, artifacts, or sagas. Now in this deck we don't particularly play a ton of legendaries or artifacts, but it will trigger whenever we play a mana rock or our commander. And the Scry 1, especially at the earlier stages of the game, can actually help us control and set up our draws. If you, for example, desperately need a land to drop on the next turn, you can just scry, see if it's a land on top. If it's not, you just scry to the bottom and your chances of actually drawing a land get a little bit bigger. Any additional benefit benefit we can get on these small 1-drop evasive creatures is always really good. You can also choose to just play vanilla 1/1 unblockable or flying creatures for this deck. They will get the job done just fine, but the benefits we get out of small little effects like this might actually change the outcome of the game. Fairy Seer. Whenever this fairy enters a battlefield, we get to scry 2. As I mentioned with the previous card, early in the game, scrying is just a fantastic mechanic, because you can just manipulate your draws and actually set up your game plan for the moment that Vinnie is online on turn 4. Gingerbread, a 1 mana 1/1 cookie with haste. For 1 mana, it has an activated ability making it only be able to be blocked by creatures that have haste, essentially making it unblockable. Gingerbread is one of the only evasive 1-drop cards that actually has haste. So if for some reason later in the game you're stuck at 3 speed and an opponent removed all your evasive attackers, you can just drop this from your hand, activate its ability, and swing in and get the last speed trigger you need. Gingerbread also is the only card in this deck that allows us to get to max speed as early as turn 3. For this to happen, we have to drop a specific land on turn 1 and then follow up with a Gingerbread. I will be covering this in the land section later in the video. On top of that, it also has the same ability as a food token. For 2 mana, tapping it and sacrificing it, we can also gain 3 life. Once we do hit max speed in this deck, all the speed enabler creatures are useless in this deck because we don't really care about the combat damage. After you did hit max speed and you do have some mana left, you can just pay the 2, sacrifice this, gain a little bit of life, and you still are able to get a little bit of value out of it. Gudul Lurker, a 1 mana 1/1 salamander that can be blocked. It also has the Megamorph mechanic, but in this deck we honestly really don't care about it. You can just view it as a simple vanilla 1 mana 1/1 unblockable creature. Harrier Strix, another 1 mana burp we play in the deck. Whenever this card enters the battlefield, we get to tap any permanent. I know this ability isn't all that impactful on a game, but in some weird fringe situations this might actually change the outcome of the game. If someone has a flying blocker for your evasive creatures, you can just use this to tap that blocker down. But the main thing what makes this card an exceptionally good 1-drop for this type of deck is its activated ability. For 3 mana, we get to draw a card and then discard a card. So early in the game, this creature just functions as a card to get you to max speed as soon as possible. And once you are at max speed and you have this and Vinnie on the field, for 3 mana, you get to draw 2, discard 1, which is some excellent value. Hope of Girapur, a 1 mana 1/1 flying artifact creature. And this card probably has the strongest effect on all the 1-drop creatures we play in this deck. When this creature deals combat damage to an opponent, we can just sacrifice it and that opponent can't cast any non-creature spells until our next turn, which basically is the same thing as casting a non-creature silence on that player until it's your next turn again. This effect will completely shut down any combo players, any spellslinger players, or even earlier in the game, anyone that wants to accelerate their mana by playing something like a Farseek, a Kodama's Reach, or whatever. The fact that you can just prevent someone from winning the game on something as simple as a colorless 1-drop creature is absolutely crazy. This is just one of the must-have cards in the deck. Hypnotic Siren, a 1 mana 1/1 enchantment creature with the Bestow mechanic. Bestow basically means that for the Bestow cost, in this case being 7 mana, you can play this card as an aura and attach it to a creature on the battlefield. When you do bestow this card on an opponent's creature, you do get to gain control of that creature. It will gain +1/1 and it will gain flying. Now, will you ever be casting this for 7 mana to steal one of your opponent's creatures? The answer to that question is probably never. But like I mentioned, just this being a 1 mana 1/1 flying creature is enough to include it in the deck. But I can guarantee you, if you do play 10,000 games with this deck, there will be one of those 10,000 games where you actually win the game because of this additional effect. Ilvoy Galeblade, a flying jellyfish. A fantastic body we can drop early to get our speed up, and it has a really good activated ability. For 2 generic mana and sacrificing this creature, we get to draw a card. So if you play this early in the game, you can just hit your opponents and get your speed up. Once you are at max speed, this card has no function in the deck anymore. If you then have Vinnie on the field, you can just sacrifice this card for 2 mana and draw 2 cards out of it. And this creature also has flash, meaning we can cast it on instant speed. So if you do pass a turn and you have some mana open because you really want to save mana to use a counterspell if it's needed, if no opponent is playing a threat and you don't need your counterspell, you can still use the open mana to just flash this creature in. Merfolk Windrobber. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to an opponent, they have to mill a card. Is this a game-breaking ability? No, not by any means. But if you do hit an opponent with this and they have to mill one of their combo pieces, you might just win the game of this simple trigger. And if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, we can also sacrifice this creature to draw a card. Thanks to our wheel effects and some of our mill effects, our opponents will always have more than 8 cards in our graveyard. So another card that can bump up our speed and can draw us cards. Mockingbird, a 1 mana bird bard. Now this creature has an insane effect. We can make it enter as a copy of any creature on the battlefield with mana value less than we spent on Mockingbird. So if your opponents control a card like Esper Sentinel, Archivist of Ogma, a Loto, you can just make this bird enter as a copy of those if you do have the mana for it. And if you have this card in your opening hand, you can just cast it for 1 mana and you will have a 1/1 flyer to get your speed up. During playtesting, one of my opponents actually played an Esper Sentinel on turn 1 and I just followed up with my island into a Mockingbird, copying the Esper Sentinel. Having a 2/2 flying Esper Sentinel in this deck as early as turn 1 is absolutely crazy. And I probably don't have to mention that I won that game really easily. Siren Stormtamer. This creature has an awesome activated ability to protect both us and Vinnie. For 1 blue mana and sacrificing this creature, we get to counter any ability or spell that counters us or a creature we control. Someone is trying to use a Path to Exile on Vinnie, just sacrifice this creature and Vinnie is fine. A Ravenous Chupacabra is entering the battlefield and the ability is targeting Vinnie, trying to remove it, just sacrifice this creature and Vinnie will be fine. Someone is playing a Bresh Taunter and they deal 1 million damage to the Bresh Taunter and they want to redirect it to you as a player, just sacrifice this creature and you will be fine because you can counter the ability. Probably one of the best 1-drops in the deck because it still has a really great use even after you hit max speed. Spectral Sailor, another 1-drop creature with flash, meaning we can just keep our mana open for a counterspell, and if we don't use the mana for the counterspell, we can just use it to flash in this creature. And on top of that, for 4 mana, it has an activated ability that allows us to draw a card, which with Vinnie on the field allows us to draw 2 cards for the low cost of 4 mana. Next up, we have the card draw section. These cards are all efficient, high impact draw spells that allow us to churn through our deck really fast. And keep in mind, with Vinnie on the field, all these cards will draw us double the amount of cards they normally would, which is absolutely insane. Let's start by talking about one of the most efficient draw spells ever printed. Brainstorm, a 1 mana instant speed spell that allows us to draw 3 cards and put 2 cards from our hand back on top of our library. Now for as long as you are at max speed and you do have Vinnie on the field, this card actually reads draw 6 cards and put 2 cards from your hand back on top of your library, which is an effect that would normally cost you about 5 mana to generate that much value, but we get it for just the 1 mana, which is absolutely ridiculous. Careful Study, a card that normally goes break even in value by drawing 2, discarding 2, but with Vinnie, this card draws 4, discards 2. Pretty good deal, right? Detection Probe, one of the most effective cantrip cards ever printed because its cost can be paid with 1 blue mana or 2 life, essentially making this into a free card draw spell because you don't actually have to pay mana for this. First up, you get to look at target player's hand, just revealing you some information that might help you down the line and allow you to keep some counter spells open if you know what threats are coming. But the main reason why we play this is the last line. Draw a card. Honestly, even without doubling up the value with Vinnie, this is already a great card for any blue deck. Because essentially this card allows you to play 99 cards in your deck instead of 100 because it's just a free spell that replaces itself. But thanks to Vinnie, this is just a 0 mana spell that says draw 2 cards. Skull Clamp, one of the most well-known equipment cards in the Commander format. They only cost you 1 mana to cast it and 1 mana to equip it. The equipped creature will then get +1 power and -1 toughness. And whenever the equipped creature would die, we get to draw 2 cards. Now I'm sure you already experienced this in any of your commander games, be it you doing this or your opponents doing this. Just create a bunch of 1/1 creature tokens, and for 1 mana and equipping this to one of these tokens, they will die because their toughness goes to 0 and you will draw 2 cards for 1 mana. And for as long as you can keep generating 1/1 creatures, you can keep repeating this effect and you can draw an insane amount of cards of Skullclamp. Now in this deck we don't play any token generation, but all 12 of our speed enablers have 1 toughness. So after they did their job and they got us to max speed, you can just start Skullclamping these creatures to draw you an insane amount of cards. We also had the option to include some 1-drop evasive creatures in the deck that actually have 2 toughness, which is strictly better than 1 toughness. But because we play a card like Skullclamp, I decided to have all speed enabler creatures have 1 toughness. And with Vinnie, this card basically reads equip 1, draw 4, Born Upon a Wind, a 2 mana instant speed card that allows us the turn we cast it to cast any card on instant speed. This basically means every single card in our deck gets flash for the remainder of the turn. You can use this during an opponent's turn to cast one of our mass bounce effects because all of these are on sorcery speed. You can use this to cast any of your sorcery speed draw spells during an opponent's turn. And the main reason why this card is so good and we play it in the deck is because you can just keep a ton of mana open for any counter spells you would like to play. If your opponents are not casting any threats and you don't need the counter spells, you can just use this card and flash in any of the other cards in the deck to actually build your board with or any of your win conditions. I find it really hard to give examples of how good this card can be, but trust me, this card has won me a ton of games. It just gives you a huge amount of utility. And obviously with Vinnie on the field, cantrips get even more efficient because they don't just replace themselves, they actually give you card advantage because they will draw you 2 cards. Credit Voucher, a 2 mana artifact with an activated ability that functions as some sort of a one-sided wheel for us. For 2 mana, tapping it and sacrificing it, we get to shuffle any number of cards from our hand into our library and then we get to draw that many cards again. This is a really efficient wheel effect since you can just cast this artifact and leave it on the battlefield and just use it whenever you need it. If you, for example, have this on the battlefield and on a later turn you just start chaining some draw spells and you actually have 40 cards in hand thanks to Vinnie, which in this deck isn't that hard to do, you can just crack this artifact, shuffle those 40 cards back into your library and you will get to draw 80 new cards. Yeah, Vinnie does double this up. And you don't even have to reshuffle your entire hand. You can just pick 2 of the 40 cards you need and shuffle the remaining 38 back into your deck. And this will draw you 76 cards. I know these numbers might sound really big, but I'm actually not exaggerating this. It is really easy with Vinnie in this deck to draw like 20, 30, 40 cards. Ideas Unbound, a 2 mana spell that allows you to draw 3 cards and then discard 3 cards at the end of your turn. Now usually spells that allow you to draw 3 cards come at a cost of at least 3 mana. This is the only 2 mana spell that actually allows you to draw 3. Normally this spell goes break even by drawing 3, discarding 3, but with Vinnie on the field you draw 6, discard 3, netting you a total of 3 cards in card advantage. Tolarian Winds, a 2 mana instant speed wheel effect for ourselves. Whenever we cast this we have to discard our hand and then we get to draw that many new cards. Normally whenever you cast a spell like this you don't gain any card advantage because you, for example, discard 5, draw 5. Thanks to Vinnie's ability you will just double the amount of cards in your hand whenever you cast this. Discard 5, draw 10. Discard 20, draw 40. And the fact that this card comes at such a low mana cost is absolutely crazy. Let me just give you an example of how efficient this card really is. One of the win cons we play in this deck is Psychosis Crawler, a creature that will deal 1 damage to each opponent for every card we draw. Let's say you have Psychosis Crawler and Vinnie on the battlefield and you have a total of 5 cards in hand. You then decide to cast a Brainstorm, drawing you 6 cards and putting 2 cards back. Then you decide to cast a Careful Study, drawing 4 and putting 2 cards back. Thanks to the Careful Study, you just drew a Detection Probe. So for 0 mana, you decide to cast a probe and draw 2 additional cards. You now have a total of 10 cards in your hand and one of them is Tolarian Winds. You then decide to cast the Winds, discarding 9 cards and drawing you 18 new cards. So for the really low cost of just 4 mana, you just drew 30 cards and dealt 30 damage to the entire table, which is absolutely bananas. The fact that you can just chain a ton of draw spells and finish up with a 2 mana Tolarian Winds doubling up on the value thanks to Vinnie is absolutely ridiculous. One of the best draw cards in the entire deck. Talking about one-sided wheel effects, Whirlpool Rider. A 2 mana 1/1 Merfolk creature that whenever it enters a battlefield makes us shuffle our entire hand into our library and then we get to draw that many cards again. This card functions in the same way as Tolarian Winds does, but this time it doesn't come on an instant speed spell but on a creature body, just allowing you to chain a ton of huge card draw spells and then finishing up with this card, and thanks to Vinnie being on the field you will draw an insane amount of cards. The only difference with Tolarian Winds is that this card will shuffle your hand back into your library and doesn't make the cards go to the graveyard. Brain Search. This card is basically Brainstorm's more expensive big brother. For 3 mana we get to draw 4 cards and put 2 cards of our hand back on top of our library. With Vinnie, this card reads draw 8 cards and put 2 cards back, netting you a total of 6 cards for 3 mana, which is just absolutely insane value. Flux! This 3 mana sorcery speed spell allows each player to select any number of cards in their hand and discard them. Then every player gets to draw a card for each card they decided to discard this way. Usually your opponents will just be selecting the cards in their hand they don't need at the given board state and drawing new cards for each of them. And for us this just functions as a wheel effect with Vinnie on the field. We can just select as many cards as we like and we draw double the amount of those cards. And on top of that, this card is also a cantrip. So no matter if players decide to participate in the wheel effect, we will always draw at least 1 card of this. Frantic Search, a 3 mana instant speed spell that allows us to draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, and then we get to untap 3 lands. In most decks, this card just basically functions as a break-even free spell. You just tap 3 lands to pay for the cost of this card, you can then loot and untap the 3 lands, and this card basically costs 0 mana. But in our deck, this card actually gives us positive value because we will be drawing 4, discarding 2. Since this card can also be used on instant speed, you can just leave 3 mana open for any counterspell you'd like. You can just cast this first, draw a bunch of cards, untap the 3 lands, and you still have the 3 mana open for the counterspell. Jace's Archivist. A 3 mana creature that's basically Windfall on a stick. For 1 blue mana and tapping it, each player has to discard their hand. And then every player will draw cards equal to the biggest number of cards discarded this way. The fact that we can just keep repeating this effect every single turn for as long as this creature is on the battlefield is absolutely insane. If you do have Vinnie on the field, just set up some draw effects, make sure you have like 20 cards in your hand. Then for the low cost of 1 mana, you can tap this creature, discard all of those cards, and you will draw 40 new cards. Your opponents will be doing the same and they will gain half of the value. Instead of drawing 40 cards, they will draw the 20 cards you discarded. But at the end of their turns, they will have to discard down to hand size. And thanks to Vinnie, we have no maximum hand size. If you are going for the mill wincon with Aether Siphon, this card can actually even help you milling your opponents because they will be drawing a million cards of this. Talking about Windfall, obviously we also play a regular Windfall in the deck. This card is basically just the effect of Jace's Archivist but on a sorcery speed spell, which also has some benefits because if you drop a Jace's Archivist, you actually have to wait a turn to use its effect because it doesn't have haste. With Windfall, you don't have that downside. You can just play it and you will immediately gain its effect. The downside is that unlike with Jace's Archivist, it's a one-time effect and you can't keep repeating this every single turn. That being said, Windfall is probably one of the stronger cards in the entire deck. Winter Night Stories, an awesome new spell we got in the Tarkir Dragonstorm set. For 3 mana we get to draw 3 cards and then discard 2 cards unless we discard a creature card. As you know, we play 12 speed enabling creatures in this deck and we don't actually have a use for them later in the game. So if we draw into any of these creatures, we can just discard them to this effect and we will net a total of 2 cards. And thanks to Vinnie's ability, this card actually reads draw 6, discard 1 creature. And on top of that, this card also has the Harmonize mechanic, meaning we can cast this card from our graveyard by paying the Harmonize cost, being 5 mana. We can also tap any creature we control and it will reduce the cost of this card by 1 for each power that creature has. And we don't play any huge power creatures in this deck, but usually you can just tap one of your speed enablers to actually be able to cast this for just 4 mana. Getting 2 uses out of this card is really efficient, and even if you discard this card by using one of the wheel effects in this deck, you can still get a use of it from our graveyard. Meeting of Minds, a 4 mana instant speed spell that allows us to draw 2 cards. And it also has the Convoke mechanic, meaning we can reduce the cost of this card by 1 mana for each creature we control that we tap whenever we cast this spell. And since whenever we get to max speed, you don't have any use for the speed enablers anymore, and you will never be tapping Vinnie for anything, you can just tap Vinnie and a creature and you will be able to draw 4 cards for just 2 mana. Teferi's Ageless Insight, a 4 mana legendary enchantment that whenever you draw a card, except for the first one you draw during your draw step, will give you an additional card draw. This card basically functions in the same way as Vinnie does, just doubling up every single card draw effect we already play in the deck. If for some reason you don't have access to Vinnie anymore because you have to pay way too much commander tax, or someone transformed them into a 0/1 creature with no abilities, you can still use this card to still be able to draw a ton of cards in this deck and actually close out the game this way. I know this might seem like a little bit of a win more card in the deck, but it is actually an excellent backup plan for Vinnie. And the last card in this section is Treasure Cruise, an 8 mana spell that allows you to draw 3 cards. And it also has the Delve mechanic, meaning whenever we cast a spell, we can just exile cards from our graveyard and the generic mana cost is reduced by 1 for each card we exiled. Thanks to all the wheel and loot effects we play in this deck, we will always have a graveyard filled with a ton of cards, essentially turning this card into a 1 mana spell that will draw us 3 cards. Or thanks to Vinnie, a 1 mana spell that will draw us 6 cards. Before we continue, a quick shout out to all the YouTube members that keep this channel alive and make sure I can keep doing what I love doing. If you're enjoying this video or you just like listening to me rambling on about cardboard for an hour straight, consider joining the YouTube membership program. You'll get early access to every list of these decks before the videos even go live. You get access to some exclusive chat rooms in the Panzer MTG Discord server. You get access to some awesome Panzer MTG emojis you can use anywhere on Discord and YouTube. And at the highest tier, you can even submit your deck for a personal review by me. So if that sounds fun, or you just want to support your favorite Magic content creator, hit the join button below the video or check the link in the description below. Next up, we have the support section. These are just 3 cards that didn't fit into any other category, but they all play a key role in the deck. Meekstone, a simple 1 mana artifact that has a really oppressive effect. All creatures with power 3 or greater don't untap during their controller's untap step. Most decks are completely shut down by this 1 mana artifact. Any deck that relies on attacking with their creatures or actually playing some big creatures is just entirely shut down by this little card. You're playing against a Jetmir deck that is all about creating a ton of tokens and then buffing them up. Once they swing with their creatures, they will just never untap anymore. And since we don't play any creatures ourselves and we don't care about getting into combat with our creatures except with our 1-drop speed enablers, which only have 1 power, this is a one-sided effect. Meekstone is a really powerful and really efficient card, but just be warned, if you play at more casual tables, this card will make people not like you and you won't be invited to game nights anymore. Slick Imitator, a 2-drop creature with the Start Your Engines mechanic. In this deck, you will always cast Vinnie on turn 2. You just need to get your engine started because the deck just doesn't work without max speed. This card actually gives you another option to drop on turn 2 to get your engine started, and you can just keep Vinnie in the command zone and your opponents can't interact with him. You can just play him whenever you are at max speed to get the benefit out of him. And on top of that, this creature has an absolutely insane ability you can activate for just 1 generic mana and sacrificing this. You just get to copy target spell you control. You can use this both to copy any of your card draw effects whenever you have Vinnie on the field. You can copy a Brainstorm, one of your wheel effects, and just double up on the card draw value on top of the value Vinnie already gives you. And you can even use this to copy any permanent that's still on the stack, just allowing you to get 2 copies of that permanent. You can get 2 credit vouchers, Panzers, 2 Whirlpool Riders, 2 Sapphire Medallions. This card just provides you with some excellent value, and it does give you another option to cast on turn 2 instead of just always casting Vinnie. Spark Double, a 4 mana clone card that whenever it enters a battlefield will enter as a copy of a planeswalker or a creature you control. If it does enter as a copy of a creature, it's not legendary. The only reason why we play this card in the deck is just to function as a copy of Vinnie, just doubling up on our doubled card draw. When you have 2 Vinnies on the field, things just get ridiculous. A Brainstorm will now draw you 12 cards. If you play a wheel effect with 5 cards in your hand, you will now get to draw 20 new cards. Even playing a simple cantrip spell like a Detection Probe will now draw you 4 cards. And since you do have 2 Vinnies now, your opponents will have to deal with your commander twice. Next up, we have the ramp and acceleration section. This section includes mana rocks, cards that double our mana production, and cards that reduce the cost of any card we play in this deck. High Tide, a 1 mana instant speed spell that will make all islands that are tapped for mana this turn tap for 2 mana instead of the usual 1. As mentioned before, the playstyle of this deck is just building up to max speed and then setting up a massive storm turn, where you will be casting a million cards, just chaining card draw spells and going for the win condition. Usually you will be trying to set up this win condition by turn 6 or 7. Thanks to High Tide, if you at that point control like 6 islands, you can just tap an island and the other 5 islands will generate you 10 mana instead of the usual 5. I always like to call High Tide the blue ritual card, because like the black and the red ritual cards, this card will just give you an explosion of mana you can then use to just win the game that turn. Sol Ring, classic 1 mana rock that taps for 2 colorless mana. During the turn that you are setting up for the win, you need every single point of mana generation you can get, because the 1 mana might actually make the difference to draw even more cards, empty your library, and then play one of our win cons to actually win the game. Springleaf Drum, a simple 1 mana artifact we can tap and tap an untapped creature we control to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. As mentioned before, we will always be controlling Vinnie, but we will never be swinging with him or tapping him for any reason, so thanks to Springleaf Drum, this actually turns Vinnie into a mana dork. Or after you hit max speed, your 1-drop creatures will have no use anymore, and this way you can actually still use them to generate you some mana. Mindstone, a 2 mana rock you can tap to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. And for 1 generic mana, tapping it and sacrificing it, you also get to draw a card. Mindstone is already a really efficient card, but especially with Vinnie later in the game, you can just sacrifice this and you will be able to draw 2 cards of it. Thought Vessel, another 2 mana rock that will add a colorless mana to your mana pool. And it passively will also make sure you have no maximum hand size. The no maximum hand size is the same ability as Vinnie, but if you do have 20 cards in hand and an opponent removes Vinnie at the end of your turn, you will have to discard down to hand size. So just making sure you have additional effects in the deck that make you have no maximum hand size is always a really great backup plan. Sapphire Medallion. This card will reduce the mana cost of any blue spell we cast by 1 generic mana. If you're playing a monocolor deck, there really is no reason to not include any of the Medallion cards. They are just really efficient cost reducers and they do generate you a ton of value, especially if you plan on casting multiple spells in a single turn. Extraplanar Lens, a 3 mana artifact with the imprint mechanic, meaning whenever this artifact enters the battlefield, we have to exile a land we control. That land then gets imprinted onto this card. Then, whenever a land with exactly the same name as the imprinted land gets tapped, we get to add 1 additional mana to our mana pool. Obviously, in this deck, we will always be imprinting an island on this. And from that point onward, every island we tap will generate you 2 blue mana instead of the usual 1. This card is by far the strongest acceleration card in the entire deck. High Tide just gives you its effect for 1 single turn, but for as long as you control extraplanar lands, you will have a permanent High Tide. Do keep in mind, this effect also counts for your opponent. So if your opponents control some basic islands and they tap them for mana, they will also produce 2 blue mana instead of 1. And the last card in this section is Racer's Scoreboard, a 4 mana artifact with the Start Your Engines mechanic. You can basically ignore the Start Your Engines because we will always be starting our engines on turn 2 with Vinnie. Whenever this artifact artifact enters, we get to draw 2 cards and then discard 1 card. And obviously this card draw will be doubled by Vinnie, so drawing 4, discarding 1. And whenever we are at maximum speed, this artifact will reduce the cost of any spell we play by 1 generic mana, just allowing us to set up some really explosive storm turns and just close out the game by chaining draw spells and winning the game with one of our win conditions. Next up, we have the win conditions. These are the cards that make this deck really unique, not winning through any damage or any combos. Instead, we play 5 unique win conditions that allow us to win the game by just drawing cards. And all of these are enabled by Vinnie's double draw power. Let's start by talking about what in my opinion is the strongest and most reliable win condition in this deck. Aether Siphon, a 3 mana artifact that will start your engines. But once again, you can ignore this because we always will be playing Vinnie on turn 2 to get our engines started. And whenever we are at max speed, this card has a passive ability that is just absolutely brutal for this type of deck and will win you the game really, really fast. Whenever we draw a card, each opponent has to mill 2 cards. At this point in the video, you're probably aware that this deck can easily draw like 20, 30, 40 cards in any given turn. When you then have this card on the battlefield and you can set up a huge draw turn, you will just mill out every single one of your opponents at once. Just imagine you have Vinnie on the battlefield, this card on the battlefield, and then you can play a couple of draw spells, get to like 20 cards in your hand, then play a wheel effect. You discard 20 cards, draw 40 new cards, and each opponent will have to mill 80 cards. And usually by the turn you do this, each opponent will only have about 80 cards left in their deck, just milling them out entirely and they will all lose the game instantly. This card is basically the speed variant of Jace's Erasure, a classic win con used in many other draw decks. And on top of that already really great ability, it also has an activated ability for 2 generic mana, and tapping it we get to draw a card. Or 2 cards whenever we control Vinnie, and all opponents will have to mill 4 cards then. This is by far the most reliable win con in the entire deck, and it has won me more games than all of the other win cons combined. Laboratory Maniac. This 3 mana creature serves as an alternate win con in the deck. Whenever you have to draw a card and your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. In this deck you will be going through your library really, really fast. No pun intended. If you can then get a Laboratory Maniac on the field and you are able to draw a gazillion cards and you have no cards left in your library, the game is just over. You just won. In most games, your opponents will never see this coming. They will have a board filled with dinosaurs, vampires, whatever, an Eldrazi deck, I don't know. And you will just be sitting there as a mono blue deck, barely doing anything, having like 1/1 evasive creatures on the board, so they won't even target you. Suddenly you then drop a Lab Maniac, you draw 40 cards, your deck is empty, and you just win the game. It's over, and their board state are worth nothing. Just a reaction on your opponent's faces when the game is suddenly over and you are the winner and they lost even though they had the better board presence is absolutely priceless. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, a 4 mana planeswalker that has exactly the same effect as Lab Maniac. If you would draw a card and your library is empty, you just instantly win the game instead. An excellent backup plan for whenever you mill your own Lab Maniac or it gets removed or countered for some reason. On top of that, you can also use his +1 ability to make an opponent mill 2 cards and you get to draw a card. I won't be covering the ult because you probably will never ever get to that point in this type of deck. 20 Toad. It's a 4 mana frog wizard. Passively, as long as this creature is on the battlefield, our maximum hand size is 20. You'll understand why he has this ability real soon. If we attack with 2 or more creatures, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature and we also get to draw a card. I suppose in some situations you can actually swing with Vinnie and one of your speed enablers to get some extra card draw out of this, but this ability is probably irrelevant in this deck. The reason why we play it is its last ability. Whenever this creature attacks and we have 20 or more cards in our hand, we instantly win the game. Yeah, that's right. We only need 20 cards, which at this point in the video you should realize is really easy to do thanks to Vinnie. Just swing this creature and the game is over. You don't even have to connect with it and deal combat damage. Just declare him as an attacker and GG. Obviously, this is not as consistent as the other win cons because you actually have to play the Toad as a turn because it doesn't have haste and it does have to stay on the battlefield for an entire turn cycle before you can swing with it. But I even included a solution for that problem in this deck. I will be going over it in the land section later in the video. And the last win condition we play in this deck is Psychosis Crawler. It's a 5 mana artifact creature and its power and toughness is equal to the amount of cards we have in our hand. In this type of deck, this will always be a huge creature body, but that's not the reason why we play it. We play play it for its last ability. Whenever we draw a card, each opponent will lose 1 life. For this card to win you the game, you don't even have to draw your entire library. You can just have this creature on the battlefield, and if your opponents are already at like 20 life or something, you can just follow up with some cheap cantrip spells like a Brainstorm, a Careful Study, whatever, and you will burn down the entire table at once. Usually whenever you have this creature on the battlefield and Vinnie, you can just play some cheap draw spells, then follow up with a wheel effect, and the game will instantly be over. Alright, real talk for a second. If you've been wondering why this image of Mike Wazowski has been sitting behind me for the entire video, it is because the more I look at Vinnie, the more convinced I am that Wizards didn't actually design a new commander. I'm actually pretty sure that one of the design members was just watching Monsters Inc. and they decided to copy Mike Wazowski into the Aether Drift set. I mean, think about it. These guys are exactly the same, except for one is green and one is blue. If you also believe that Vinnie's design is based off Mike Wazowski, do me a favor. Hit the like button and comment an eye emoji. Let's make more people aware of this conspiracy theory. Next up, we have the interaction and counter magic section. We run a package of really efficient counter spells to protect both Vinnie and any of our win cons. And we also place some bounce effects that will bounce all creatures on the table to actually buy us some time and set up our win cons. Abjure, a simple 1 mana counter spell that allows us to counter any spell on the stack. But in addition to its mana cost, we do have to sacrifice a blue permanent. Like I mentioned, after we hit max speed, all of the speed enabler creatures in this deck don't have a function anymore, so you can just use them as fodder to sacrifice to this really efficient 1 mana counter spell. An offer you can't refuse, another 1 mana counter spell that allows us to counter any non-creature spell. The controller of the countered spell will get 2 treasure tokens in return. This deck does have one big weakness, and that is your commander being removed by spot removal or by board wipes. An offer you can't refuse can solve both of those problems for just 1 mana and giving some treasure tokens. March of Swirling Mist. For 1 blue mana plus X, we can make X creatures face out. Phase out means these creatures don't exist until our next upkeep. As an additional cost for this spell, we can exile any amount of blue cards from our hand. The cost of this spell is then reduced by 2 generic mana for each blue card we exiled. This card does have a couple of uses in this deck. You can pay 2 mana to cast the spell and just target Vinnie and make him face out, actually protecting him. Perfect answer to any spot removal or board wipes. Or later in the game, if you got a huge draw turn with Vinnie and your opponents are swinging at you with like 5 creatures, or they're about to go infinite with some of their creatures, you can just exile some blue cards from your hand and you will be able to make all those creatures phase out, removing any combat threat or removing any combat pieces your opponents control. In this deck, I decided to include a ton of cards that are really efficient and require you to exile cards from your hand. Because as you can imagine, in this deck you will always have a huge amount of cards in your hand. Vapor Snack, a 1 mana instant speed spell that bounces a creature. Now I know this card is absolutely horrible. There are way better bounce cards printed in Magic. But this card also has the additional effect that the controller of that creature loses 1 life. If for some reason you can get through with any of your evasive creatures and you are stuck on 3 speed, you can just during your turn Vapor Snack one of your opponent's creatures. They will lose 1 life and this will up our speed by 1, getting us to the maximum speed. So a good way to deal with any problematic creature on the battlefield, or also a way to just up your speed by 1 without even swinging with a creature. Arcane Denial, a 2 mana counter spell that allows us to counter anything. If we do counter a spell this way, the controller of that spell gets to draw 2 additional cards at the beginning of the next upkeep. And we also get to draw an additional card of this. 2 mana to counter any spell is already a really solid deal, and the fact that we do play a Vinnie deck and we actually get to draw 2 cards of this makes this card even better. Obviously, you don't want to use this to counter an Elvish Mystic and just give an opponent 2 cards. In return, you actually want to use your counter spells for anything that threaten our game plan. Counter spell, 2 mana, counter anything. Yeah, it's an all-time classic card, but it's still good in modern day Magic. Muddle the Mixture. For 2 mana, we get to counter any instant or sorcery spell. A perfect way to counter any spot removal or board wipes. But the real reason why we play this is its transmutability. For 3 mana on sorcery speed, we can discard this card to search our library for any card that has the same mana cost and put it directly into our hand, functioning as somewhat of a tutor. You really want to accelerate your mana? Just use this card to go tutor up your extra planar lens. You really need a wheel effect? Just use this card to go tutor up a Flux. Fantastic card with 2 uses, a counter spell or a way to tutor any card you need at the given board state. Negate. For 2 mana, we get to counter any non-creature spell. Since this deck is built on a €100 budget, we do have to use counters like this. I'm not saying it's a bad card by any means, but there are way more efficient options, but they do have a hefty price tag. Archmage's Charm, a 3 mana instant speed spell with 3 fantastic options. Functions as a counter spell that counters anything on the stack. You can also use this as a draw spell that allows us to draw 2 cards or 4 cards with Vinnie, or we can use this to steal any permanent that costs 1 mana. A perfect way to steal a Soul Ring and generate extra mana for yourself. None of the options on this card are broken, but just the fact that it gives you the choice of one of 3 fantastic options makes this card fantastic. Options are what make Magic cards go from good to great. Flare of Denial, a 3 mana spell that counters anything. Or instead of paying 3 mana to cast a spell, we can also sacrifice a non-token blue creature, essentially making this into a free counter spell. We will always have a blue creature to sacrifice, being one of the 1-drop speed enablers. And free counter spells are just absolutely fantastic in this deck, because let's say you're actually setting up for a win and you play your Laboratory Maniac and you're entirely tapped out. You then are about to cast a Detection Probe and just go for the win by drawing the last cards in your deck, and your opponent uses a negate to actually counter that. Even though you're entirely tapped out, you can just sacrifice a blue creature, cast a spell for free, counter the negate, and you just win the game. Sink into Stupor, a 3 mana spell that allows us to bounce any non-land permanent or any spell on the stack. Bouncing a spell on the stack is essentially countering it, since the opponent will have to tap the mana again and cast it again. So we can both use this to deal with any problematic spells that are being thrown at us or at our creatures, or we can use it to bounce any problematic non-land permanents on the battlefield. And there are honestly no downsides to including MDFC cards in your decks, because you can just play the backside and it is a land that taps for a blue mana, and you can even make it enter untapped for the cost of 3 life. Foil, a 4 mana counter spell. And like Flare of Denial, we can also cast this counter spell for free. The only thing we have to do is discard an island and any other card. In this deck, we will always have like a million cards in our hand, and discarding an island plus something else will never be a problem. Another free counter spell that will protect our game plan when we are actually going for the win. Whelming Wave, a 4 mana sorcery speed spell that will bounce all creatures except for Krakens, Leviathans, Octopi, and Serpents. I decided to include a ton of these mass bounce spells that will bounce all creatures or non-land permanents, because I do play in a pot where players really love building a big board. And these spells only have one function, just buying us time. Since Vinnie only has a low cost of 2 mana, bouncing him back to our hand usually isn't that big of a deal. We can just recast him for 2 and we have bought ourselves a ton of time to actually set up our win conditions. Evacuation, for 5 mana we get to bounce all creatures. And on top of that, we can also cast this card on instant speed. It's the only mass bounce effect in this deck that's not a sorcery. Season of Weaving, a 6 mana card that will give us 5 paws, and we can choose 5 paws worth of options. For 1 paw, we get to draw a card. 2 paws allow us to copy any artifact or creature we control and create a token copy of it. And for 3 paws, we can bounce any non-token, non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So we can use this to draw a ton of cards. We can also use this to copy any relevant artifacts we have in this deck, like an extra planar lens or even an Aether Siphon, just doubling up on the amount of cards we can mill and allowing us to close out the game faster. And it also functions as a mass bounce spell. And the best part about this card is the fact that it gives you the versatility to combine any of these options just worth a total of 5 paws. You can draw 2 and bounce everything. You can draw 3 and create a copy. You can create 2 copies, draw a card, or you can just even draw 5 cards of this card if you want it. Spectral Deluge. For 6 mana, this card will bounce every creature your opponents control with toughness less than the amount of islands you control. Yeah, that's right, it's a one-sided mass bounce effect. And since in this deck we do play cards like Extra Planar Lens and this card, I decided to play a ton of basic lands. So usually at the point you get to cast this card, you will be able to bounce every creature with toughness 5 or less, which, let's be honest, is most creatures. On top of that, this card also has the Foretell mechanic, meaning during our turn we can pay 2 generic mana and exile this card face down, so your opponents won't know which card you just foretold. Then at any later turn you can pay the Foretell cost, being 3 mana, to actually cast this card from exile. The only things you really have to do every single game is on turn 1 play an evasive 1 drop, and on 2 drop Vinnie. Then you will have like 2 or 3 turns where you don't really have to do anything and you can use those to just foretell this card. Then just the 1 turn before you are actually setting up your winning turn, you can use this card, bounce everything, buy yourself some time, and you can cast it for only 3 mana. So both the cheapest mass bounce spell and also a one-sided effect. And the last card in this section is Commandeer, a massive 7 mana spell that allows us to pick any non-creature spell on the stack and we gain control of it. Now this card can have some really weird and fun interactions on the stack, but the main purpose of this card is whenever you are going for the win and someone is about to destroy your Jace, your Lab Maniac, your Aether Siphon, you can just use Commandeer, take over the spell, make it target something else, and you can just protect your win condition. And that is because instead of paying 7 mana to cast a spell, you can just exile 2 blue cards from your hand and you can cast the spell for free. Once again, we will always have a million cards in our hand and we will always be able to exile 2 blue cards for this. And in return, we get a way to protect our win conditions or our commander. Next up, we have the lands. Even though this is a mono blue deck and we do play a ton of islands, we do play some utility lands. Amonkhet Raceway, a land that will start our engines whenever it enters the battlefield. And whenever we are at max speed, we can also tap this land to give any creature haste until the end of turn. The first use in this deck is actually giving haste to 20 Toad Toad, the card that wins us the game whenever it attacks and we have 20 or more cards in our hand. Thanks to this land, you can just play the Toad, give it haste, swing with it instantly, and instantly win the game. You don't have to wait an entire turn cycle with the Toad surviving on the board. And the second use this card has is actually getting to max speed as early as turn 3 instead of turn 4. And for that to happen, you need 2 specific cards in your opening hand, being this land and Gingerbread. You can just play this land, go to 1 speed, tap it for colorless, play the Gingerbread, it does have haste, swing it at an opponent, and you will be at 2 speed as early as turn 1. Then you can just keep swinging with the Gingerbread, and on turn 3, when you swing with it and connect with it, you will be at the max speed already. I don't really know what the chances are of having these 2 specific cards in your opening hand, but I'm sure some people smarter than me are watching the video and you can let me know in the comments below what the chances are of actually getting a Gingerbread and this land in our opening hand. Cephalid Coliseum. This land will tap for 1 blue mana and it will ping 1 damage to you. Additionally, for 1 blue mana and tapping it, we can sacrifice this land to draw 3 cards. But we can only activate this ability if we have 7 or more cards in our graveyard. As you've seen in the draw section, we do play a ton of wheel effects and we will always have more than 7 cards in our graveyard. Then for just 1 mana and sacrificing this land, we are able to draw 3 cards. And with Vinnie on the field, we are actually able to draw 6 cards for just 1 mana. Lonely Sandbar. This is a land that taps for blue mana, enters a battlefield tapped, and it also has the cycling ability, meaning we can discard this card from our hand by paying 1 mana and we are allowed to draw a new card. But with Vinnie on the field, we are actually allowed to draw 2. Mystic Sanctuary. This land will enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more other islands. Whenever you do meet this requirement and this land enters a battlefield untapped, you get to put target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. A perfect way to recur any of your wheel effects, Countermagic, or even one of your bounce spells. Reliquary Tower. A land with the same effect as our commander has. We have no maximum hand size. A great backup land for when your commander is removed and you have 20 million cards in your hand. This land will ensure you don't have to discard down to hand size at the end of turn. Scavenger Grounds. For 2 mana, tapping and sacrificing this land, we get to exile all graveyards. Now we do have some graveyard interaction in this deck ourselves, but nowadays in modern day Magic, a ton of players rely on actually using their graveyard. Be it a Necrobloom player, a Reanimator player, even a Spellslinger player that wants to flashback all their spells. You just really have to include some form of graveyard hate in your decks because it will actually win you games. Urza's Cave. For 2 colorless mana, tapping and sacrificing this land, we get to search our library for any land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Now this land is mostly used in landfall decks nowadays, but it is a tutor for any lands we play in the deck. You need some graveyard hate, just go tutor up your Scavenger Grounds. You want to set up for a win with 20 Toad Toad, just use this to go fetch up your Amonkhet Raceway. You really want to recur any instant or sorcery from your graveyard to the top of your deck, just use this to go fetch up a Mystic Sanctuary. Urza's Cave really is one of the better utility lands out there. And we do play 27 basic islands. We play this many basics because we play cards like Extraplanar Lens and cards like Spectral Deluge. Next up, we have the upgrade section. If you do want to push this deck to its limit and you don't care about a €100 budget, these are the cards I'd include in the deck. You don't need any of these cards to make the deck work, but they do make the deck a lot more efficient. At the end of this upgrade section, I will also flash in the screen which swaps I'd make for these cards in the deck. Swansong, a really efficient 1-mana counter spell that allows us to counter any enchantment, instant or sorcery spell. In return, the controller of that spell does get to create a 2/2 bird token. We don't really care about the 2/2 bird since we won't be winning through combat anyway, so let's just give them that blocker or that 2/2 to swing with. But in return, we get a really efficient 1-mana counter spell that we can use to protect our win cons. Cyclonic Rift. This 2-mana instant speed game changer card is probably one of the best bounce spells ever printed. It allows us to bounce any non-land permanent on the battlefield that actually threatens our game plan. But the best part, for 7 mana we can overload the spell and bounce any non-land permanent on the battlefield we don't control. A one-sided reset for the entire table that will buy us more time to set up our win. Mana Drain, a 2-mana spell that allows us to counter anything on the stack, and at the beginning of our next main phase we get to add colorless mana to our mana pool equal to the mana cost of the countered spell. Yeah, what can I say? This is just a straight upgrade over the classic counter spell, and you can set up some really explosive turns with this. Just imagine countering someone's 4-mana spell on turn 4, and at the beginning of your 5th turn you will have 5 islands available plus 4 colorless mana, giving you a total of 9 mana to work with on turn 5, which is absolutely crazy. Tassa's Oracle. This card is obviously one of the best alternate win cons ever printed. It's a really popular CDH card because it is that good at closing out the game. When this creature enters the battlefield, we get to look at the top X cards of our library. X being the amount of devotion to blue we have, meaning the amount of blue mana pips and permanents we control. Then if X is equal or greater than the amount of cards we have left in our library, we just instantly win the game. This card is just a straight upgrade over Laboratory Maniac. It costs 1 mana less, and it also has an immediate effect whenever it enters the battlefield. You don't even have to cast anything after you cast the Toracle like you have to do with Lab Maniac. It's an absolutely broken card, and I will rest my case. I will never ever include it in any of my decks. That being said, it is in the upgrade section. Do what you want with it. If you want to include it, do it. Fierce Guardianship. For 3 mana, we get to counter any non-creature spell. And as long as we control our commander, we can cast the spell without paying its mana cost. Another 0 mana counter spell that will protect your win con even if you're tapped out. Force of Negation. For 3 mana, we get to counter any non-creature spell, and if that card is countered this way, it gets put into exile instead of into the graveyard. And as long as it's not our turn, instead of paying the mana cost of this card, we can actually exile a blue card from our hand. Now, usually in this deck, you will be winning the game on your own turn, and this won't function as a free counter spell during our own turn, but you can still use this during an opponent's turn if they are playing a game-winning card to still counter that. Harbinger of the Seas. This 3 mana Merfolk will make every non-basic land on the battlefield into an island. This is basically the blue version of Magus of the Moon or Blood Moon. Nowadays in modern day Magic, everyone is playing like a 2, 3, 4, 5 color deck, and barely any players are playing basic lands. Just imagine playing against an Earth Dragon player and they control 3 Triomes. For as long as this creature is on the battlefield, those Triomes will be basic islands, and you can only tap them for blue mana, just entirely shutting down their entire deck. And since they can only generate blue mana, they will have no way to deal with this creature. It's a really strong and oppressive effect, but this card is banned in my personal playgroup. That's why I decided to exclude it from the deck. Heuristic Study, another classic game changer card that everyone knows. For 3 mana, you get an enchantment that says whenever an opponent plays any spell, they have to pay 1 generic mana or we get to draw a card. Do you pay the 1? First up, I really don't like Heuristic Study. Asking people to pay the 1 is just annoying and really obnoxious. Second of all, as you will see in this upgrade section, we do play a ton of game changers. If you want to stay in the limit of 3 game changers, this is the last game changer I'd include in the deck. I'd prefer any other game changer over this one. It will draw you a ton of cards, but it doesn't really help you with some explosive draw chains to actually win the game with Vinnie. That being said, Heuristic Study is a card you can include in any deck that plays blue. There is a reason why they turned this card into a game changer. Force of Will, the most expensive card in the entire upgrade section. It's also the oldest card in the upgrade section. For 5 mana, you get an instant speed spell that allows you to counter anything on the stack. But the main reason why this card is so pricey is the fact that you can just exile a blue card from your hand instead of paying the mana cost. By far, the most efficient free counter spell ever printed. Raise the Palisade, a 5 mana sorcery spell that allows us to choose a creature type. Then all creatures that aren't the chosen creature type will be bounced to their owner's hand. I don't think there are many homunculi creatures out there like Vinnie, so the main benefit of this card is actually playing it, naming Homunculus, and you bounce everything but Vinnie remains on the field, making it into one of the most efficient mass bounce spells we can play in this deck. And the last card in the upgrade section is Sea Gate Restoration. It's a massive 7 mana sorcery speed spell that allows you to draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand plus 1. And in addition to that, you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Will you ever use the front side of this card in this type of deck? The answer to that question is probably never. Unless you are able to make a million mana with extra planar lens or high tide, you won't ever be casting this. You have way more and way cheaper efficient draw spells in this deck that actually can allow you to close out the game. That being said, in 1% of the games you play with this deck, this card might actually win you the game. Because let's say you have 20 cards in hand, you can cast this, you will be able to draw 21 extra cards. Or when you have Vinnie on the field, 42. The main reason why this card is included in the upgrade section is because it also just functions as a basic land. You can just play the backside, taps for a blue mana, and even enters untapped when you pay the low cost of 3 life. There really is no downside to including this card in the deck, since you can just play it as some sort of a basic island. But honestly, paying 30 euros for a card that makes your deck like 0.0001% better is not really worth it in my opinion. So unless you have this lying around, I wouldn't spend the money on it. I'll flash the swaps I'd make for the upgrade in this deck into the screen real quick, so make sure to pause the video if you actually want to see them. And that's it for my full breakdown of Vnwxt, the Verbose Host, the weird little homunculus that wins games by just drawing cards. And honestly, the deck doesn't get that much better even if you spend more money on it by including the upgrades. The core package of this deck works really well on the budget, the upgrades just make it a little more efficient. And if you made it to the end of the video, let me know by commenting an eye emoji in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.